Today is Training Tuesday. We really only have one topic, and it is a fairly big topic, but so I didn't want to overload too much here. And it's going to involve bid buy process change, how we add vendors to our bidders tab, and it is a big enough topic that I wanted to just be able to focus on this one thing today and not add too much. And then, of course, we'll have our fun fact of the day and the quote of the day. Okay, so our big topic today is adding vendors in the bidders tab. Okay, so this is going to be quite a big change for our processes. Of course, in the past, in all those job aids, the agency has been tasked with adding vendors to the bidders tab. Moving forward, though, and effective immediately, the SPO will now add vendors to the bidders list. And the reason there's a number of reasons why, but really as a best practice, it's a best practice to have the most updated pool of vendors when the bid goes out. So now many of your bids may move through the approval paths quickly. It may get to the SPO for approval in no time. But many times we do have some of those that will be a little bit slower getting to the SPO from the time that the bidders were added. So it makes sense now that we would have the SPOs add the bidders, because certainly for small purchases or any of those NIGP codes that we have set aside for small businesses, every single day we have new vendors added to the vendor pool, as well as those that are being expired. So we want to make sure that that is really the driving force here. So the job aids that were updated, I just posted them right before this training. So if you go out, you'll see that they all have new version numbers. And the job aids that were updated: IFB, RFP, small purchase, $10,000 and above, sole source, emergency, renewal, state use. And as I'm looking through that list, I realized I didn't update the change order job aid. So I will do that right after this training. And really what it is let me go out and just, I can just, you know what, I'm going to walk through this first, but then I'll go out and show you the difference. But really it is just that one step where in the bidders tab, where you go in and select your vendors, you're searching by NIGP code, all that sort of stuff. I just pulled that down from the agency, and now you'll be submitting for approval without adding your bidders. This is effective immediately, and I know we'll probably have questions regarding this, and we're happy to answer them. You can always reach out to your SPO as well, or reach out to me with questions. APOs will be emailed immediately following this training, and make sure that everybody's on the same page regarding that. So your procurements won't get kicked back for not having those bidders in the bidders tab. So I guess a couple notes to kind of unpack this a little bit is this does not affect small purchases less than $10,000, right? Because those are done at the requisition. They are not required to go to bid, hence the SPO won't be on your approval path. Just as a reminder, always attach that small purchase designation memo for your small purchases less than $10,000. Another thing, you can always add vendors to the bidders list without having to do a bid amendment. So that's always kind of been the case. Even once a bid is in sent status, you can add a bidder to the bidders list by simply going through that same process, going and adding lookup and add vendor. A lot of times we see this when you know that there's a vendor that can provide that good or service, but you don't see them on the bidders tab. Now we see this a lot when vendors are not registered for are not registered for the proper NIGP codes, and sometimes that is you know that vendor is available, and so you don't see them on the list, and you can add them specifically to that list, and that is okay. So this is regarding essentially anything that you would be adding vendors to the bidders tab. So let's see what this also wouldn't affect, of course, release off masters, right? Because that vendor is just the one vendor and it's automatically added, right? So trying to think if there was anything else other than the the change order. So the renewal. Oh, I love our SPOs. We're Jennifer, you're absolutely right. It does apply to exempt procurements as well. That's the other one that I need to get added. So I will update the change order job aid and the exempt job aid as well. So really, anything that we potentially could have a slightly different vendor list later on in the path, and so that's really where this is coming from, and it's really a part of the approval, the SPO's approval, is that responsibility to make sure that all our vendors are listed there. So this also brings up the idea that the communication and documentation of those NIGP codes that are being used is just going to be that much that much important there. So we want to utilize that additional NIGP codes field in the items tab. And so I want to go out and just show you where that is again. And also another thing regarding if you have procurements that are in the middle of the approval path right now, you don't need to disapprove anything. Vendors can't be added twice. So of course, if you have vendors that have multiple NIGP codes that you're using, they're not on the bidders list twice. Bid by kind of filters that out. So they only get the one notification. And certainly if you can always add a vendor later, because sometimes we see this as well. Maybe a vendor is not even in bid buy and they get into bid buy as a once you see that they're not in bid buy. And this happens quite a bit too, right? Where you can direct solicit a vendor in terms of doing some outreach. Maybe direct solicit is not the correct word, but you can do outreach to let that vendor know, hey, we think you could potentially provide this. And we always want to point them back to bid buy, and they may just go ahead and get registered at that point. So that is always okay. Certainly you wouldn't send them bid buy documents outside of the system, but you just want to point them directly back to the bid buy system and let them know that they can find all the information there. But that is certainly okay. And we do get that question quite a bit too, is it okay to reach out to a vendor that we think could potentially provide or be on our bidders list? And if you don't see them on there, you can always add them later too. So like I said, it can be in a sent status already, and you can add the vendor without having to do a bid amendment. Okay, let's see. Let me make sure I don't have any other questions I'm missing so far before I go out and just show you that. One question I don't quite understand. So this is a huge change, and thank you. Will bid buy be updated as well to avoid complications? So maybe I might kind of ask a little bit more questions there regarding will bid buy be updated? So in this case, it's not really updated. The job aids are now updated, with the exception of me making the change to the change order and the exempt. But yes, any time that you'd be adding vendors to a procurement, so this is kind of more of a blanket statement here. Anytime you're going to be adding vendors, that will now be the SPO's responsibility at the tail end. I will say this too: if the agency, an SPO is not going to disapprove because you added vendors. So, like I said, since vendors can't be added twice, if we're not going to bottle things up and disapprove for those reasons, because we would just, as an SPO, I would just go ahead and do that step anyway in terms of adding vendors. So if there is any of that communication that doesn't get out to some of our agency folks, that's okay. Certainly for, like I said, for those that are in the path now or don't get this communication in a timely manner, moving forward, we hope that they would go out to our new job aids and see that it's not their responsibility anymore to do that piece. And so why don't I go out there right now and just kind of show you real quickly. Okay, so on our job aids, right? So this is where the job aid page is. And you know what? Every time I do this, it's probably a good idea just to show you exactly where I get there. I do make that as a favorite since I'm in there quite a bit. So from the CPOGS website, you can click bid buy at the bottom of the page, and then click bid buy resources for state agencies. And that'll take you to where our job aids are. So let me pull up a job aid here and you'll see what I'm talking about. Let's pull up the IFB. Once again, you can see that the version numbers have changed, and then I always put the date that that was published, so that's a fairly easy reminder for you. Make that a little bit bigger. So everything else is, nothing else has changed here, and actually the step hasn't actually changed, it's just who is doing it. So you can see here at the bid stage, where this section right here, in the bidders tab, look up and add vendors, selecting the NIGP code, et cetera, that used to be right up here, and it was an agency responsibility. Now it's going to be a part of the SPO approval process to add those vendors. Like I said, to have the most updated vendor pool possible. So what happens is, as an SPO, I will add the vendors, approve, and then send the bid. Or approve, add bidders, send the bid. Either way, it's essentially going to be, there's no really right or wrong answer in terms of that, but that way we know that from the time the SPO clicks send, we have all of our most up-to-date vendor pool. So in the training environment, let me go back and just pull up a bid that I have. I believe this is a small purchase. Yep, so here's a small purchase. What you're going to see here is, of course, I don't have the bid opening date and a couple of these questions here, but you can see that there's an overall validation warning, that there's no bidder. And all that means is we haven't added bidders here, and that is absolutely totally fine. That's what you're actually going to see at this point. Like I said, if your agency, I know you guys are used to putting in all the bidders, and so an SPO isn't going to disapprove because they're there. It's just know, I want you guys to know that SPOs are already going to be doing that step, so you don't have to. Let's see, so you can see how I would go in and go through that process the way I normally would, look up and add vendors. But the one piece I wanted to particularly highlight is in the items tab, there is that additional NIGP codes field, and I think this would be a good point to highlight that field is there, and that way SPOs will know exactly which NIGP codes are being used. Now it'll be different depending on some of the solicitation documents. Some of your solicitation documents might have the NIGP codes listed in there. In this case, it's a small purchase, so maybe you would potentially could put it in on the RFQ, but there's also this field right here. It's called additional NIGP code. So each item, of course, as a required field, you have to put in an NIGP code, but you can only put in one that's attached to the item. So there is this NIGP code, because we always say, right, we want to cast a wide net. You're going to have those goods and services that are applicable to multiple NIGP codes. And we also always tell all our vendors too, to register for as many NIGP codes as they possibly could be appropriate for their business. And so this additional NIGP code, I think, is even going to be that much more important, because when, as agency personnel, when you guys were adding it, you might just kind of know the NIGP code you're using, or maybe you have it written down somewhere. Whereas here we want it to be documented more so that the SPO can go and look at the NIGP codes that are going to be used there. So that'll be kind of a helpful tip. I know if there's different workflows being used, if you want to add those NIGP codes via email, I think this is probably going to be the best practice, just because it's right there, very clear for the SPO to see which additional NIGP codes could be appropriate. Also, when you look back on previous procurements, right, many of these small purchases, you did one last year or the year before, and you're really essentially going to be doing new, you don't need to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. You could go back and use some of those same NIGP codes, and that's there for future small purchases. So I'm seeing a couple questions come in. Let me open that up and see what we got. Is it true that we no longer need to add BEP vendor bidders as well in the subcontractor tab? Yes, so the subcontractor tab, you do not have to use the subcontractor tab at all. It's just, it's a little bit duplicative, and there's just additional information in there that would already be a part of your documentation for, like a U plan, those sorts of things. If the agency wants to utilize the subcontractor tab, we're not we're not going to stand in the way. It's just you're not required to. Does this apply to JPMC all as well? Sorry, I missed a couple here. Not just agency specific. Correct. Yeah, this will be for any procurement moving forward that will be adding vendors. If the buyer has additional NIGP codes they would like to utilize, how do we convey this to the SPO? Oh, you know what? I probably missed that prior. So for that question, you'd absolutely use this additional NIGP code that's in the items tab. That way it's documented for the file, and it's also very clear to the SPO what NIGP codes are going to be used. Also, do the codes have to be pre-approved by the SPO? Not necessarily pre-approved. One of the things that the SPO is approving are the NIGP codes, and so when they're adding those vendors, it's not really a pre-approval per se. I mean, I guess if an SPO disagrees that an NIGP code shouldn't apply, they could just not utilize that one. But I mean, I think you're not really gonna run into that issue, because like I said, we want to cast a wide net. We want to use as many NIGP codes as possible to have our vendor pool as big as possible. So I don't foresee that ever being an issue in terms of being pre-approved by the SPO. Our next question. I love this, by the way, too. These are all great questions. Thanks for chiming in here. If the BEP veterans goal are performed within the requisition stage, the BEP veteran coordinator will require NIGP codes, which were used prior to getting to the bid phase. SPO comes in at bid phase. How does the new process affect How does the new process affect the BEP/veteran process requiring NIGP codes? It doesn't. So this doesn't affect what would happen at the for BEP goals. Now, it's just in terms of adding the vendors at the bid stage. So you are correct there in that the SPO doesn't come in until the bid stage. So that's also a part of what is really required here for the SPO, is to ensure that all of those NIGP codes that were used for the BEP and veteran goals are a part of those vendors. So we want to make sure that all of the BEP goals, all of the BEP NIGP codes and veteran NIGP codes that were used for goals are listed there for the to add all the vendors. Does this include BEP and NIGP codes added in the additional NIGP codes? So yes, those NIGP codes for the BEP goals, those will be listed in the solicitation document as well, and so that'll be that much clearer for your BEP goals. It sounds like we got a few people kind of thinking the same thing, so that's good that we're thinking about how this is going to affect BEP goals. Now, as everybody knows, the BEP goals is at the requisition stage, so this really is just affecting how we add vendors to the procurement. Because if we were adding, for instance, we talked about that timeline that could happen from the time that a bid is being processed. There potentially could be a lot of time from that point to the point where it actually gets published. So we want to ensure that maybe a BEP vendor that it gets registered today, for instance, with BEP, and then gets in bid by, or vice versa, that most the real driving force here is just getting that most up-to-date vendor pool is added right before it's published, so we don't have that slight lag in time. And like I said, for many procurements, that potentially might not be the case, because it could potentially move faster. But for some of those, I have seen a bid that's in that in progress stage for quite a while. Maybe there's some back and forth and specifications. Certainly for our more complicated procurements on IFBs and RFPs, there's a longer timeline there, and we just want to ensure that we are getting the most up-to-date vendor pool. Okay, so let me go back to my slides here. And like I said, as more things come up and as more questions arise, I should say, feel free to please reach out to your SPO, your APO, and we'll kind of, maneuver through this new process. I think it will help things. And at the end of the day, it's helpful to the vendor community. And that's really what we're doing this. So let's go back to the slide. I talked about this, the adding vendors in the bidders tab. You will see this yellow vendor validation warning that's saying, hey, you haven't added any bidders yet. That's totally fine. That's exactly what you're going to see. And the SPO will add the bidders. So at the end of the day, it's actually less input work for the agencies. So this is good news for you. But if you're at the agency and you have any sort of concerns, by shifting some of this responsibility, or not some of the responsibility, by shifting the responsibility to add bidders to the SPO, it doesn't mean that the agency cannot add vendors. It just means that you do not have to. Okay, so we get back to the fun fact of the day. I didn't know this. This makes total sense now that I read this. Movie trailers were originally played after the movie. They trailed the feature film, hence the name. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then our quote of the day, it's not the super, it's not the most inspiring quote, but it made me laugh and I love that episode. So this is compliments of Mr. Dwight Schrute from The Office. Quote, before I do anything, I ask myself, would an idiot do that? And if the answer is yes, I do not do that thing. I love Dwight. So, like I said, not the most inspiring, but at the same time, ask yourself, would an idiot do this thing? If not, do not do that thing. All right, everybody, as usual, this will be posted out to the training center. And then, like I said, the email will go out to all of our APOs and everybody will be on the same page regarding adding vendors. Have a great rest of your week and we'll see you next Tuesday.